You are listening to the Enormocast.
I think that Black Diamond has a marketing problem on their hands. Too many cam codes. The C4, the Z4, the C3, the X3, the C3PO, and the R2-D2. Oh, hey, Disney lawyers. We'll scratch those last two. But their problem is your gain, because the reason for all the gobbledygook is that Black Diamond refuses to stop innovating their cams. First, they introduced the ultralight C4s, and 30% lighter equals pounds across a full rack, folks. Which means you don't have to think twice about that glazed energy ring you gobbled while standing in line at 7-Eleven at 4 a.m. on your Alpine start. Then, if multi-sets of ultralights is too rich for your blood, they made a wink and a nod to the cheap dirtbags and redesigned the original C4 as 10% lighter. Then, after another espresso or 10, they sat down and combined the C3 and X4 into the better, badder Z4. Finally, sort of as a joke, I think, they burped out the number 7 and number 8 Camelot so the masochist could masochist even harder. Are you keeping up? Well, the only thing to really remember is that the climber engineers at BD can't stop, won't stop making their cams better, so the next time you are plugging gear anywhere, you're set up for yet another best day ever. So go to blackdiamondequipment.com and check out the best protection money can buy. And you know what? It wouldn't hurt you to place a nut once in a while either. Do you like compliments? Compliments are good, right? From the outright, straight-to-your-face statements of praise to the knowing look and slight chin jut from your favorite bro at the gym, compliments can turn your frown upside down in an instant. And hands down, of all the gear I peddle on the Enormocast, the item that receives the most out-of-the-blue compliments are the splitter hats from peterwgilroy.com. You know, the ones with the titanium plaques and badges. That's right, titanium on a hat. Peter started making these hats a few years ago and has kept the styles coming with designs inspired by the great mountain ranges of the world. So if you're one of those people with a head and who enjoys random praise from friends and strangers alike, go to peterwgilroy.com and check out the splitter hats and all the wearable art that Peter creates. Even better, receive a discount and help out the Enormocast by entering Enormo at checkout. That's peterwgilroy.com and enter Enormo at checkout.
Listen, where are you playing in town? Are you playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
big
place that side of town. That's a big
nice
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000 seats? We really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed traveling with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Bad weather. Now or later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is about 11 o'clock p.m. Daylight Savings Time on the 15th of March, 2021. The Ides of March have brought Jim Reynolds to the Enormocast. Lucked into an interview with Jim Reynolds. Some of you know Jim Reynolds from holding the previous speed record on the nose with Brad Gobright before Tommy Caldwell and Alex Honnold beat it in a protracted effort. Some of you may know Jim Reynolds because he free-soloed up and down Fitzroy in Patagonia. And some of you may know Jim Reynolds because he was in the film in Real Rock 14 as sort of the comic foil for Tommy and Alex Honnold, which doesn't do Jim Reynolds justice and actually didn't do Brad Gobright justice either. And I actually didn't really like that part of that movie. I thought it was a choice in bad taste, depicting them as unsafe while Tommy Caldwell and Alex Honnold taking 100-footers were somehow the safer pair doing the nose speed record. Yeah, I didn't get it. Love all those guys involved, though. So don't get me wrong, just a small critique. Nevertheless, where were we? Yeah, Jim Reynolds is on the show, so let's look forward to that. And I'm going on a climbing trip tomorrow for 5 days. 5-day climbing trip with my lady, sans a normal child. Which 5 days climbing doesn't sound like a big deal to a lot of y'all just hanging out in your vans doing whatever the hell you want. But it is a big deal, especially climbing with the Enormo baby's baby mama, because we don't get to climb together that much because we're handing off the kid. Anyway, looking forward to that. But let's get this thing out the door before we leave. Yeah, it was kind of cool. I lucked into this one because Lauren Delaney Miller, who is on the last episode, after we got done, said, who you should interview is my roommate. And I was like, well, who's your roommate? And she said, Jim Reynolds. And I said, oh, the hell yeah. I'll interview Jim Reynolds. So she kind of arranged it, talked Jim into doing it. And I always had imagined that Jim would be sort of reclusive and not so talkative. But it turns out that he's pretty damn talkative and pretty excited. And once you kind of get him rolling, man, he does not stop. And I just took the opportunity to kick back and listen to it just like you guys kind of do. You'll find that I didn't jump in very often in this one. Just let Jim roll, stream of consciousness, telling stories down in Patagonia, in Yosemite. And also it's kind of interesting because not only does it complement Lauren's interview from last time, those guys running in the same circles, obviously, but it also complements Pete Whitaker's interview from earlier this year because Pete Whitaker rope soloed the free rider in a day, and Jim actually made kind of a hilarious and, in his own words, psychotic attempt to solo the free rider in a day, rope solo. And he did actually end up rope soloing it, but it took him longer than a day, which is a fun story that he tells. I feel like this one just fell into my lap, which is super cool, and I'm glad I got to meet Jim across the computer screen. These stories made my palms sweat, but they also made me a little worried about him, sort of a parental way. Him getting out there and frickin' on-site down soloing things in Patagonia. Hopefully I'll meet him out there in the world one day, and I'll just sit him down and see if I can talk some sense into him. No, just kidding. He's inspiring. Glad he's out there doing what he's doing, because, man, he's living free. Living free. Jim Reynolds. The truth is that climbers live their lives off the rocks in approach shoes. Part comfort, part performance, part signaling to that lady across from you on the bus that you and the crazy free solo guy are essentially cut from the same cloth. That's right, lady on your way to Target. Don't you know I'm loco? That's why Sportiva has invented the most versatile approach shoe yet, the TX Guide. Sprinkling in DNA from their acclaimed running shoes, brilliant climbing shoes, and the legendary TX line, the TX Guide for women and men can run to the climb, bash down the climb, all in time to climb into your stool on the patio of your local brew pub. So if you want to walk both streets and trails like a golden climbing deity, check out all of Sportiva's approach shoes at Sportiva.com or your favorite local shop.
It seemed like y'all had some pretty similar paths, and one of those things that listening to the two of you chat, you're surprised that you don't know each other.
Yeah, it's funny, but it's like there is a generational gap, and also like I'm no longer kind of like the out there everywhere climber, so I definitely feel it when I'm talking to someone who's sort of in that scene now, who's 20 years younger than I am.
You're like, wow, that stuff's all still going on, huh?
Yeah, it's funny because it's like, it's definitely one of those things where it's, things have changed, but also like, there's just new people in the same old roles in a lot of ways too,
the continuum.
Yeah, so it's not Lauren particularly, but a lot of people think that they like invented this, this way of life. They've discovered it and like invented it a whole cloth, and it's like, no, we kind of did the same thing only. And then, the guys and girls before us, like, kind of did the same thing, Like,
yeah. No, it's funny you say that because that was my experience getting into the whole climbing scene in general, was hearing the stories about what happened in the 60s and stuff in the valley and the dirt bagging that occurred then. And and thinking that it was long dead, and that I was like the one person who was gonna do it again, go dirtbag it, live simply and in the woods and like go climbing all the time. And of course, then I showed up to Yosemite Valley and thinking I was the only one doing this, and you run into everybody else, and yeah, you're like, oh no, it's not dead, it's like fully alive. All the
it's funny. You like wander up to find, I see that great baby spot over there, and the boulders are like, oh nope, somebody's in there, and then you're like, okay, what about over there? Oh, no, but somebody's in that one.
Yeah,
and maybe I'll go sleep behind that tree. Oh nope, somebody's behind that tree.
Right. And then these days for sure, I'm kind of in that point where you're looking at the younger generations, wondering like, who are the young monkeys that are kind of filling our spots, and are they being replaced? And it's funny because it's hard to see. Sometimes you get that feeling of like, oh, we were the last generation, and who's down there, who's doing it now? But then, like you said, you just run into people who are in that same role, getting started off and epicking on all the little things, but loving every moment of it. Having such a good time.
Yeah, completely. And it's you kind of have to take. It's like there's two different stances, and I think one of them's really dangerous, and the other one's like, I think the way, and that is that like you can get all super crusty and think like, we were doing it better and we understood it better, and it was all better when I was like in there. Or you can just be like, oh, they're out there, and right now right now they're epicking on 10A, but that's only going to last for a couple more months before just like me, they suddenly like kick the door open and are off and running. So. Yeah, it's a better way, and you're a lot younger than I am, so I'm more familiar with the crust that can build up. But this podcast has helped me with that.
I mean, you always hear about the classic, like, oh, climbing's exploding now, and all these people who have different values are out there now, and like you said, kind of the saltiness and the complaining about it. But I feel like that kind of should inspire you to have that active role of being like, find a couple folks that you can show a trick or two, or give them a couple like words of advice, or a little piece of what you've learned along the way, and like kind of helps push the people in the right directions. I think we've all had someone who's like a mentor to us, or I mean, these days there's not like a lot of true mentors who are like, okay, you're coming with me on all these missions. But mentorship, I feel like these days comes in like a few words or a phrase or just something inspirational that goes on. So I feel like that's something, honestly, I'm doing. I'm always, as I travel around on the east side or down to Joshua Tree, like all the kind of classic spots, I'm always kind of keeping my eye out for someone who I feel like has that spirit and that fire and that energy, and help them pass some of the hurdles that we've all encountered,
It's interesting you say that, because I think like, there's people who are either well-known, if you want to call them celebrity climbers or something like that people are turning to. But I think someone like you, it's important that you realize that even though you haven't been a self-promoter and you're I think pretty under the radar within climbing, but that you still have this influence, and there are, it's easy to think like, oh, I'm just this other climber, nobody knows who I am, or I keep to myself. But know that there are these young climbers that are like, oh, there he is, like that's Jim Reynolds, or like, and the same with me. Like I've always, this podcast has sort of made me more famous than my climbing resume ever should have. Right. People just recognize but I'm still voice. Like, oh, they listen to me, they're like, I need to like, I need to, not watch what I say, but, just be aware that like I have a little bit of status and the things I say can have influence. Yeah, for sure. For sure. You start to realize your impact and your role. And for me, it's definitely been interesting because, like you said, I try to think, play it kind of undercover, and most of the times I'm hanging out in the woods, but then definitely in the last like year and a half, definitely since being in like Real Rock and stuff, you just have people who recognize you in random places, or just tell you like, wow, I think what you're doing is so cool, or obviously doing the free soloing thing, people are like, that's amazing. And as you said, you don't have to be like too careful about what you say, but also like I feel like you got that, or I personally have that responsibility sometimes to offer some of the counterpoints, Cause, sure. Yeah, I mean, the free soloing thing, it's a little bit tricky, right? It's like, wow, I want to do that when I grow up. You're like, let's roll that back a little bit, like.
Yeah. fun happens sometimes, you know?
Right.
Fear and questioning, like all the choices you've made in your life are the other part. But it's been fun, though. I feel like I was always someone who was maybe like afraid of being recognized. Like I wanted to remain nondescript, but it's really cool having that experience where everybody you run into is just nice and your friends. And, you know, I had some people recognize me at Lover's Leap and they're like, is it weird that first thing I said to you is, oh my gosh, you're that guy? And I said, no, I'd much prefer that to like, hey, there's that guy.
Right.
You know, let's get him out of here. Yeah, you know, it's kind of nice because it just does open up the door to conversations sometimes. You know, I can be a little like reclusive and sometimes people recognize you. And just yesterday we were in the boulder field and I got to talk with some people for, you know, a solid hour about our different experiences, you know, Yosemite and what we're excited about and how to get in there and do the thing.
You know, because I also feel like even with someone like myself who pays attention to climbing, you know, pretty adamantly, and I do these things 2 a month and I'm talking to all sorts of people, like, you know, you did sort of like burst on to my radar even, you know, just a couple years ago, you know, obviously the Fitzroy climb. And then all of a sudden you popped up in Real Rock, which I'd like to talk about both of those things when we get into them sort of organically. I listened to a recent interview that you did, another podcast interview that you sent me, which was awesome because it did fill in these gaps. And a lot of times I walk into these things, you know, I joke that I don't do any research, but the reason I often don't is because I actually did, you know, for my whole, you know, sort of like climbing career, I pay attention. I didn't have to research when I interviewed Peter Croft because I was like steeped in what Peter Croft did. But with you, it is interesting because it's not like I can go out there and, you know, find a whole bunch of stuff about you. You've been sort of, you know, just keeping yourself, and you're a climber. And I think a little bit of celebrity that's come to you is probably new and not of your doing, if you will. But one thing you did mention in that interview was, and we just talked about it a second ago, is about finding mentors, you know, as a young climber in this day and age. And you lucked into a partnership with a guy named David Gailey that seemed to just fit the bill at the time when you walked into that. So can you tell me a little bit about that as a preview of like partnerships that you had throughout your early climbing career?
Right. So I was living in San Luis Obispo on the central coast of California and working at a mountain shop. I was like a ski tech. And so I would fit people for skis and get them all kitted up for the mountain, which was nowhere close, but they'd rent the stuff for cheap and then go on their weekend trip. And one day this guy came in and I was getting him fitted for skis and kind of moved on to talking about skis, mountains, mountain climbing, mountaineering. And at some point I asked him like, oh, if you like mountaineering, are you interested in rock climbing as well? And I just saw his face light up and he talked to me about like, oh yeah, I went on this Knowles course and I've got like a single rack of cams up to number 1. I didn't know what that really meant at the time, but it sounded like he had some of the gear and I didn't. And, you know, it was also at that time that I was trying to get into climbing, but I hadn't been able to find anyone to show me how. And it seemed like one of those sports where you want to know what you're doing. There was another guy in the mountain shop who kept telling me he'd take me out, but he'd like, oh no, not this weekend. So eventually I just went onto the online forums and learned how to do some top rope soloing with like a funny little 2-rope system, one side having backup knots and the other side I would have like a gree on, you know, which obviously doesn't self-feed very nicely. But like that was what I was doing just to try to get my hands on the stone at all. Mm-hmm. But when I met Dave in the mountain shop there, and instantly it was like, let's go to Bishop's Peak, which is honestly right in the center of town there. He was in high school and I was in college. I think we were both kind of I was in junior college. And so we were both getting to our end of our terms there. And I think we both had a little like free time and, you know, also the attitude of not really wanting to be in school anymore. Like we were at the tail end of it, you know, so looking forward to moving on. And we would just go out like every day to Bishop's Peak and start climbing and, you know, working as a team just to learn everything. I remember going and like taking our first trad falls together, which were like practiced falls. You know, you place the gear and you like climb and to touch your waist and you're like, okay, you got me. But he's like, yeah, I got you. Okay, here goes. You got me. It's like, yeah, you said that already. You know? I even remember, I think like one of those first falls was on a hex just because I didn't, of course, at the time know that those were a little obsolete. semi-obsolete. Hopefully that doesn't.
Well, it held, right?
Yeah, it held.
Are you here to tell the tale?
Yeah. Perfect hex placement. I would.
Nice.
You know.
It's funny that like I've talked to other people who went out and took practice falls, and then obviously if you're in the nowadays in a gym setting, like you usually take a bunch of falls in there, before maybe heading outside. But like I have no recollection, and I don't think I ever purposely like took a fall practice or anything else. Like I just climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed until it freaking happened.
Yeah, in hindsight,
and it was like so terrifying.
In hindsight, it seems kind of like a bad idea. We were on trad gear in some like chossy Central California choss pile. Just like, okay, here we go. Low angle, probably like 5'7". Not big falls, obviously, but
and a hex that you'd learn to place from like a old greasy copy of Advanced Rockcraft or something.
Oh, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's just like, the trad gear thing actually is not, I don't think that usual either of like, okay, I'm going to purposely go out there and fall on this stuff, because I've always said like, the curve is that you place so much of it and you clean so much of it before you ever fall on it, then hopefully by the time you fall on it, you've placed a good one. But you got to use what you got to use, right?
Yeah, partially I think I was fortunate. Like he's gone on to become a mechanical engineer, and I also I feel like have that mind that can solve like the big wall problems and the just understanding some rigging and stuff like that. So I feel like we both had a concept of like what a good cam placement would look like, even though we hadn't done a lot of them. So that helped keep us kind of safe in the early days. There was like, we had this rough framework of like what we knew we had to do to not get ourselves killed. And then pretty much anything inside of that was fair game.
Those attitudes are important, and how people approach it, I think, is, there's obviously terrible things that can happen to anybody when they're learning. The sort of thrill seeker approach, like I'm going to learn how to rock climb because it's like this adrenaline thing. I feel like that's like the most dangerous approach, those folks, and they don't sort of last long in the sport.
Yeah,
but the analytic approach is important. Yeah, exactly.
It's like very thoughtful and slow and calculated. And I have like at times had to contemplate like, are we just adrenaline junkies? Because there would be times you'd be like, well, no, you can't. You're not going to have like an adrenaline spike for like a 15-hour day of speed climbing. So you're like, well, but maybe like because we're such adrenaline junkies, like speed climbing for 15 hours is the only way you can be on that adrenaline for 15 hours.
Yeah, like a true junkie analogy. Yeah, like you just gotta like go for the long haul, or
until
else you don't
just
feel
crash.
anything anymore.
Can't do it anymore. Yeah, and I don't know if that's true, but I guess it's a perspective.
I don't. I mean, I'm such a pedestrian climber now. Not necessarily in terms of grades, but in terms of like what I approach in terms of risk. I can't even think of the last time I was climbing and had that true like, adrenaline wash. Because frankly, I don't like it. Like,
something's wrong.
The true one, the one where you're like afterwards and like like kind of like blacking out a little bit. Like those kind I just don't like them. Like so, I definitely know I'm not that person.
Yeah, I remember hearing Peter Croft say something about when he would do his free solos. If he ever felt pumped at any point in time, he would be upset at himself, like frustrated. Right. It was kind of like a mark of failure to even come anywhere close to that zone.
The guy's still alive.
Oh, yeah.
Like after a lifetime of free soloing,
Yeah, still doing it. There's definitely, I've got a lot of these heroes, and you look at some of them who have passed away, like Dean Potter and Sean Leary and stuff. And then you look at somebody else who was kind of like in the mix the whole time, like Timmy O'Neill, who's still doing it and still really successful in ways. And it is interesting how that starts to change your perspective of you're like, oh yeah, it's cool to do kind of like the big and bold stuff, but then also to like know how to keep yourself with such a margin that you can really stay within that line and keep doing it for a while,
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of luck, there's a lot of luck involved, I think.
Yeah.
And,
Life
and those guys like got through to a point where they had both of them have had a pretty conscious, like, okay, that it's not totally behind me, but I always think of like it's like a dynamo or like there seems to be this winding up where a group of people oftentimes just keep going harder and harder. And there's this like thing where the energy feeds off of each other. And it's like,
yeah,
you know, and from someone outside looking in, you're just like, whoa, this is kind of like a force of nature that I don't know where this is headed, you know? And a lot of people, I think a lot of those folks like Timmy and Peter just, you know, they maybe either was never affected by it. I think Timmy was to a certain extent, having talked to him, but then just had a moment where they're like, okay, wait. This train is like barreling and I got to step off for a minute, you know, or slow it down for just a second.
But I know what you're saying in that, like, it's kind of this monkey see, monkey do thing. And then I think the phrase you used that I heard was your reference group, you know? And so obviously when you're in a place like Yosemite Valley or Patagonia, like El Chaltén, it's almost even worse, you know, where you're surrounded by all the people who are some of the best climbers in the world, or at least the most motivated climbers in the world, all these people doing big things. And when, like you said, there's kind of that everybody's getting success, it seems like it's just like out there for the taking. And the only reason like why you're not succeeding is maybe because you're not like putting yourself out there enough. And then, like you said, those moments happen where all of a sudden it bites back and you realize like, oh, actually, just because we've as a group been experiencing all the success, maybe like there is a place like pull back. There's this awesome moment that a friend of mine keeps bringing up where he's talking about Ron Kauk at I think the Bridwell Memorial, and Ron Kauk comes out and he's talking about Alex's free solo free rider and saying like that what he did was incredible. We can all say that free solo ascent of El Cap was amazing, but now like maybe we should check ourselves as a community and step back and say that like that's a pretty good, you know, like no one needs to one up that sort of a thing,
right?
Which I thought were some good words, you know. And I'm a super different soloist than Alex for sure, and I've had people in my life be like, "Oh, are you trying to like one up Alex Honnold?" And I was like, "No way. That seems like a quick way to die," you know.
Yeah,
But yeah, I liked Ron's.
Well,
you know, let's take a step back as a community.
Yeah. It's funny because there's so much like legend and mythology that comes out of Yosemite and still continues to do. And you know, one of those things is that, you know, it's like everybody's here, you know, to climb for themselves and like to be in nature. And like, I just like to, you know, and that's both things are true. That is very true, but it's also true that it can be. And I think most people get caught up in a pretty competitive environment in there. And it's not like,
hard not
it's
to.
not like, okay, you know, you're yelling at each other across your tent cabins, but it's just rolling in people's minds. Like, you know, today I'm going to go harder and I'm going to be one of those people that plays in this realm with these guys, you know, talking about your reference group. And so, and I think that's totally true. Like if you were coming up there when like someone like Sean Leary was there and you're that young climber and, you know, you're watching what he does. And this is how you be great, is to follow in these guys' footsteps, you know, and that's that cycle we talked about of younger generations, like replacing the older generations. But it's kind of wild. What goes on there, like in this underlying subtle level, you know? Right.
Cause it's all, it's so compact and there is kind of, you're in the meadow with everybody else, or you're in Camp 4 with everybody else. And I remember like from my early days, like hearing the Belgians, you know, like Nico and Sean, like singing songs from across the way and being like, oh, who are those guys? You know, that sort of thing. I also think that, kind of the flip side of that is there is a lot of space in Yosemite, strangely enough, and especially as you start to get out into the High Sierra. And it is cool, I think, to see how, you know, how some of that space does lend to like creativity. And I think I really appreciate when I see people who are just, they're thinking about like what's their own personal mission or epic thing that they're going to do. Because as opposed to like, you know, if you're just all sport climbing, it's easy to say like, okay, the next hard thing for me to do is either like this next hard grade or link up these like couple routes, you know. But in a place like Yosemite, like I feel like it's cool sometimes the monkey spirit of people being like, okay, we're going to like run down Tenaya Canyon and then we're going to like solo Snake Dike and then base jump off the top and then run and go get ice cream before we, you know, or whatever. and I think that's cool because that can be fun because then it's not just like one-upsmanship. It's just like, oh, I appreciated that cool thing that you did and it inspires me to like do my own other thing. I guess what I'm trying to say is like sometimes I feel like the more I pay attention to climbing, like what's going on in the big climbing world, the more almost like I think pressure you do feel to be in that like, oh, I gotta like climb harder and try bigger things or bolder things or faster things or you know, whatever. But I feel like it's nice to like get my space and disconnect from that, and I can find that in a place like Yosemite and just kind of let the, you know, your individuality kind of tell you what's right for you rather than being overwhelmed by that community that's really strong, really fierce there, you know?
Yeah, it's very fierce. And I mean, it's, you know, it's kind of reminds me or makes me think there's like a fine line between inspiration and competition. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you just mentioned that, like being inspired to do, you know, my own thing or whatever. And it's like I said, I mean, I can't even really game it out in my head what the kind of difference is, because they are related in a way. You know, in that sense of inspiration versus like, I'm going to go bigger. Well, I'm inspired to go bigger. Well, you know, it's like kind of this wild mix that I never really thought about until we just started talking about it, actually.
Something I've been keen into recently that I think is fascinating is people always talk about wanting to do the first whatever, whether it's the first, you know, free ascent or the first ascent or the first free solo ascent or the fastest ascent. And I think sometimes that gets chalked up to be about competition and trying to do better than one another. But I think there's this other feeling that's like, because no one's done it and it's potentially impossible, you know, and so that like edge of exploration of like asking like, is this possible for like humanity at all, you know, is kind of like a question you can start to ask when you're doing these first ascents, you know, or first whatevers. And I don't know, I kind of like prefer that perspective because it makes it seem more like we're all on a team, like, you know, all working towards kind of the edges, the fringes of what our sport is, you know, or what we're doing.
Obviously, there's a complexity to this sport. You know, that word, it doesn't even do it justice. But and that's what's appealing. And we can only game it out, and each person approaches it individually. Which actually I want to ask you to change the subject just a little bit. You mentioned a second ago, you know, about, you know, people like, are you going to try to one up Honnold? And you're like, no, he's you know, that's like a death wish. But so how do you approach free soloing, and how do you think your sort of attitudes maybe your own or individual?
Well, I think in general, free soloing is pretty self-selective. Like you said, as an individual thing, it's one of those things that once you start doing, you very quickly find out what your relationship to free soloing is going to be. Whether that's like, oh my gosh, that was terrifying, I never want to do that again. Or like, oh, that was actually really cool, and I really appreciate that headspace. And I think with that in mind, like for me, it started off as that thing. Like I was just a kid of the woods, you know, I was like a backpacker and a hiker and just like an adventurer is how I always described myself early on. So I got into free soloing just from that natural movement through terrain and starting to encounter things that were technical. And then as I started to learn how to rock climb, that just obviously gave me the skills that opened up that door and that freedom to be like, cool, I can like go wherever I want and do whatever I want within reason, you know, of course, as long as I'm careful. But I think that like when I was younger, I just appreciated spending time alone in the mountains and the woods anyways. And so it's just like an obvious progression once I got into rock climbing to start going out alone and seeing what I could do by myself. Like, as I mentioned earlier, I also, you know, started off like top rope soloing. It was another like, oh, Jim's like alone doing his own thing. I've also like, in addition to some of the free solo ascents, I've done like 11, 12 days on El Cap solo. And just more recently, I actually finally freed the free rider for my first time ever and ended up doing it solo. There's like that theme of, you know, like I love my people and I love spending time with people, but I really appreciate that time that I get to spend like by myself in the mountains. It's, you know, I read something recently that basically says the person that you are when you're alone is totally different than the person you'll be as soon as you interact with a single other person. You'll never be that same person that you are when you're alone. And I think that like spending time alone, lots of time alone, has like really helped me kind of gain clarity on life and like what it is I want and what my path is. Yeah, but then back to I guess the more like climbing thought of what free soloing is. Yeah, it feels like a blessing and a curse sometimes because I both get to do these things that are incredible that sometimes feel like cheating, like you pass parties that started the East Buttress like before dawn, and you're like, oh, I just started up like half an hour ago after soloing these other couple formations, and I'm gonna like go back down and drink beers around the campfire with my friends while you guys will still probably be trying to work out the descent, and so to that extent it just seems like, oh, this is like the greatest thing, I get to have so much fun and move around and like experience all these things, and but then there's the backside of it where it's kind of like, because I don't know, I really love life and I love like the people in my life, and I'm really excited about exploring all sorts of different venues, like there's many mountains in this world, not all of rock and snow, sort of a thing. Like and I don't want to jeopardize those things, right? So like it's always in the back of my mind what the consequences of free soloing are. Like I'm not the type to be like, okay, when I go for a free solo, you just put those things out of your mind and you execute. It's like, for me, it's the opposite. Like I want to recognize, think about what the consequences are, and think about who it is that, is on like who my decisions are connected to, because I think it's nice to like get that feeling of individuality and soloness, but also when you do that stuff, you realize how connected you are to other people. It's a little bit of a paradox. Like you don't free solo anything. Like you're so attached to the rest of the world,
Well, let me ask you about the Fitzroy scent. Again, it was actually probably the first time I'd ever heard your name. And I was like, oh, who's this guy that just like just did that?
Because when I did the nose with Brad, it was like, oh, Brad Gobright and some dude jugging broke the speed record on the nose.
Totally. That's very true, actually. You sort of nailed it in a lot of ways. And then the movie, the film, though, came out after Fitzroy, so there was the lag time in between. And
right,
but nevertheless, so the Fitzroy thing is, I think the thing that's really interesting about that, and Andrew and I talked about it on the run out, just kind of sprayed about our being astounded by it. But the big, I think, key thing is the fact that you onsighted it is a pretty interesting kind of angle in terms of free soloing. And I think a lot of times we don't necessarily expect, especially in that terrain and the kind of route finding that you ran into. So can you talk about the sort of decision, leading up to wanting to do that route? And I don't know if it was the idea of onsighting was spontaneous, or if it was some sort of thing of like, I just want to have that kind of experience, or maybe I just don't have time to go up and climb it with somebody first, or how did it come about that you were like, okay, I'm just going to go up and bang this thing out?
Yeah. So it was my first season in Patagonia, and I had come down and knew a couple of people who had been there several seasons before me, and was trying to learn after them and take under their wing and get some tutelage, because I didn't really know too much about alpine climbing. And so I went out a couple of times with different folks and had a great learning experiences every time. But after one particular time going out, which was, we went out and there's actually this huge rescue that occurred out there that you've probably heard of separately. There's like two big rescues, one off Cerro Torre, and then we pulled off this other one on Rafael Juarez, but that's obviously a different story. But there's this, there was this point where, because the mountains, the climbs are so far back there when you're with a partner, it was this feeling of like, you got to have your everything so together. Otherwise you're letting this other person down. Like you got to be able to hike fast, and you got to be able to take your breaks efficiently, and you got to be able to keep your bag packed well. And because you're a team and each person depends on each other, there's less freedom, there's less ability to just like run around. And so my second time into the Torre Valley, I would get to these spots or see these boulders or see these crazy little holes in the glacier of water and just be like, oh, could we go swimming in that? And your partner's like, no, we can't stop to go swimming, or no, we can't stop to do this boulder problem. Like, are you kidding? Like, we're going to climb Point Snow or some huge mountain. Like, what are you thinking? So basically, and
they have a point.
Yeah, right. They have a great point for sure. What are you thinking? But like, so I was there. I had bought, a friend had told me, if you go to Patagonia, go for as long as you possibly can. So I bought a 3-month ticket, round trip ticket. And so I was really committed. And I felt like in that first month, I just didn't know where I was or what I was supposed to do in that place. And then by the second month, I was like, okay, I start to understand the place a little bit, but I don't understand my place in that place. And so all the big solos I did there kind of occurred in the third month, where I was, I guess, in some ways like searching for my personal interaction with the mountains there. Like a friend that Tad McRae, who had taken me out on my first mission out there, who was like he guides some big mountains, and it's just like an all around great guy, but took me out. And I remember telling him, I was like, I don't know, man, this place is kind of crazy. Like, it's cool and it's beautiful, but I like the feeling of being light and unencumbered and free and dancing through the mountains. And this is just like scary. And we feel like we're chained to being cold and suffering, and just like barely getting out alive. And he told me, he said, just wait, you'll find out how to interact with this place. And then it'll become your playground. And so that third month that I was there was when I decided, I was like, I think I'm going to go into the Torrey Valley alone. And I'm going to take all these different topos of all the mountains that are around, right? Because when you're in the Torrey Valley, you got the Fitz group on one side and then the Torrey group on the other side. And the Fitz group is a lot more rock routes, whereas the other side is a little more ice. And so I took mainly topos for the Fitz side. And I went back in there and I took my sweet time, and I took little siestas by the rivers on the way out. And I climbed all sorts of great boulder problems, just like was loving it, headphones in, just like dancing around in the sunshine back there and camping out where I wanted to in like a little hole that, just fit one person, and really felt like I was starting to understand the rhythm of the mountains out there, kind of the ebb and the flow, and like when and how the wind blows, which is obviously a pretty radical thing out there. But I had this day, right? So I hiked into the Torrey Valley, and then I had a full day just to like rest and be in the Torrey Valley and boulder. And during that day, there was this route that I felt like was looking at me. It was like all day. It was like the one route that was like shining, and I had the topo for it. And even though I had some plans to do other routes, I have to go do the Filo West on Rafael Juarez, the West Ridge. Once again, ridges, we know they're iconic, and this one was just golden granite reflecting the sunshine on this like most perfect of days. So I made that idea like, okay, I'm going to go over there, and I'm going to start early in the morning, and I'm going to just like start up the lowest sit start of this ridge. Like most people, when they do this route, they like do this whole approach, like cut into the side of it. But I basically started climbing this thing straight out of the base camp. There's an extra like 1,000 feet to link into the route. And I was just like, to have the climbing shoes on and to have a chalk bag and a little backpack with, maybe a rope to bail if I needed to, and some cams. Like, I felt like, I think it's funny talking about margin while talking about free soloing, because it seems like a activity where there is no room for mistake or failure. And certainly that's like really true in a lot of ways. But the way that I was approaching this first big solo in the range was, I'm going to try to free solo it. But if I have to like plug in a cam and clip and direct and shake out, or if I have to put in a cam and wrap and just get out of here because this was a horrible idea, like, I want to stay alive, what it takes. But if the climbing above me seems reasonable, like, I'm going to keep doing what I know how to do. And yeah, that was amazing. Once again, little backpack, just moving over terrain, the crux pitch being this like 10C deep fingers and hands pitch, like vertical, steep, really locker. And you could see it from a mile away. You're like, that's the crux pitch right there. And I got up there and I had this little 6 mil cord, and I put my backpack down and flaked out the rope and tied a little like the 6 mil around my waist with a little bowline and clipped the other side in the backpack. And then all of a sudden was, thousands of feet above the ground in Patagonia, like all alone with nothing on me but the chalk bag and this tiny little shoestring cord that just tagged my stuff up later. And suddenly I felt like I was finding that, it felt so perfect, so right, so like the thing I had trained to be able to do. And got to the top of the pitch and was able to just like pull up my backpack and put it back on and go right back into mountain scrambling. At some point, there's a couple of head wall pitches, and I just, as I looked at the head wall pitches, I was like, not only are these the kind of things that I can climb, but I think I can down climb them too. So I left, they're like the hardest pitches, the 6B pitches or whatever that means. And so I left my bag and I left my whole kit that I could use to bail and just committed to those upper head wall pitches, and then down climbed them and grabbed my bag. And then once again, down climbed an entire another route that was more like the 10A range instead of the 10C that I'd come up. But I got back to my base camp at the end of the day and I was like, cool, I had that extra margin, that extra stuff to bail in case I wanted to, but I felt so comfortable in that terrain. And it felt like, I mean, there's obviously a lot more factors out there, but it felt like another beautiful day in the High Sierra. So after that, I was like, that was the most incredible experience I could have ever asked for. I'm totally satisfied. I can just go home now. But I had some more days of good weather and plenty of food. So instead of hiking out the next day, I decided I was just going to stay and enjoy the sunshine, do some stretching. There was actually some other friends in the Torre Valley that were going to go climbing that day on St. Exubery, one of the other big formations right by Rafael Juarez. And I decided I was going to just like stay at camp. And it ended up being super windy that day. Like I was really lucky I wasn't on the mountain. The other parties that were up there ended up all kind of bailing. You know, same thing. I climbed Rafael Juarez, and then on this day where I'm resting, a party that tried to climb Rafael Juarez had to bail on those summit pitches because it was so windy that they just could not, rope and all, like everything. They couldn't get to the summit. And then, so that same day, there's another group of our friends climbing on St. Exubery who also have to bail because it's too windy. Meanwhile, I'm just like at camp, eating snacks and watching people's tents get blown away and trying to like pick up the wreckage and like put their stuff back together so when they get back to camp they won't be all bummed that all their stuff got blown away. Same thing, I'm in that idea that I'm going to bail, that I'm going to leave from the mountains, and I had my fun and that was enough. I go to sleep that night and somehow like I wake up super early the next morning just so fired up. This is like maybe a reoccurring theme for me, is that a lot of the bigger solos that I do kind of come from this like feeling of inspiration that is, it's just like such a feeling, like this overwhelming inspiration. Like I just want to go now so much. And I spent obviously a lot of time ahead of time thinking about whether or not it was acceptable for me to solo in the mountains. And I had made that decision that I think it is. So then waking up that morning and feeling that fire, I was like, cool, I've already thought about like the pros and cons and whether or not this is right for me. And now waking up feeling this fired up, like I'm going now. So I just like grabbed my little kit and just started like charging up in the mountains. And, they're huge, so it takes a long time to get up there. But I got up to the base of Chiara de Luna, which is this one of the ultra classics down there that Brett Harrington and Marc-Andre Leclerc had famously free soloed before me. And knowing that they had done it and being friends of theirs, it kind of felt like that vicarious thing, like not really like an onsight solo, but sometimes feels a little bit more like a flash solo. When someone that you trust is basically like, oh yeah, that thing, you could free solo that for sure. It's really secure. I mean, not that anyone told me that, but like I said, having relationships with those people and hearing about them doing it, being like, okay, like I think maybe it'd be okay for me too. And then this solo was a little different for me. I actually left pretty much everything behind. I left even my approach shoes behind. I took just the Miras, the chalk bag, like a liter of water clipped to my side, maybe like a puffy jacket and some sunscreen because you don't want to be caught without that stuff up there. And obviously these mountains have to be rappelled. So I climbed knowing that I would, if there was any problems, anything that I encountered that was too much, my only margin, my only like backup was to down climb. But that's like a part of how I made that decision. I actually walked to the base with the full kit in case I wanted to bring those couple of cams and the 6 mil tagline. But when I looked up at the first pitch, which is honestly one of the crux pitches, supposed to be 5'11", and I'm like, not really. 5'11" free soloing is normally out of my pay grade a little bit. But when I looked at it, I just saw a thing that I knew I could climb and down climb. I was like, oh, I could for sure get down past that. So I can get up this and I could get way up the route only to find out that it's too scary and then climb all the way to here and even though it's like rated as the crux pitch, I'll still be able to get down. But yeah, a huge epic adventure. Eventually I got to the top, and then you're on the summit and you're like, woo, kind of celebrating, but it's not over yet.
Sure.
Down climbing.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting thing, because it's like, that's like a, that's like a piece of important alpine climbing knowledge. Always, oh yeah, you're never done when you're on the summit. But, in a lot of ways, I feel like you had done the easier part at that point. I mean, most people, their stomachs would drop out at the thought of down climbing anything, even with a rope on. But yeah, so it's like, I think you were, in most people's minds, you hadn't even gotten past the halfway point in terms of commitment. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's funny too. You start finding weird things that, like, for example, topos are drawn for people coming from the bottom, not from the top. So when all of a sudden you're trying to read a topo from the top, it's pretty hard to find things. I remember on the way down, the way I went down was going down this route called the Italiana into the Kearney Harrington. And on that upper part, the Italiana, I remember you'd see like, okay, maybe it goes that way, maybe it goes that way, but I think it's this way, even though it looks really steep. And you like crawl up to the edge and stick your head, like peer over the edge to look down. And you're like, oh, there's a hand crack right there. Like, perfect. Like, yes, we found it. And then you kind of shuffle on over and scoot around and stick your feet down first. And kind of like, you can't really see your feet. So you're trying to like just jam them in the crack until you can feel them. And then you can finally like scoot off the ledge. And then once you're in like that more traditional vertical climbing stance, I think that's a position we feel more familiar with. But just that initial like slumping over the ledge to get into the hand crack is like really exciting moments for sure. But then it's my hands actually just got my hands to start sweating. So congratulations, because I mean, look, most people, the stepping off on a rappel version of that is like, good enough for us in terms of like getting your little bit of buzz going. So I can only imagine like sort of bellying down over some edge till your feet find purchase. Sounds fucking terrifying. Right at the top of the world. This is like 2,500 feet up Saint Exupery, which is just above. I mean, hold on though. Let me stop here for a second, because just if you could, and it may be difficult to do, but describe your state of mind. When you're doing that, like if you can go back there, like. Is there a nervousness that you have to control, or are you like, oh, I'm good, this is going to be fine, it's only this grade? I mean, what is the calculation, if there is one, as you do something like that? Or are you, classically just in the moment, this has to get done? So I've had a lot of different soloing experiences, some not so positive, but these ones are specifically some of the best soloing experiences I've ever had, like the most positive, everything went well according to plan. So definitely on Exupery, a lot of the time I was just so excited to be up there. Like I just felt really full and alive. And even when I was in some of the most exposed, crazy places, it'd be like, oh, this is kind of crazy. Like, I wonder what's next. Yeah, a lot of that was just a very positive, excited headspace. The flip side of it, and this is a little piece that I learned from Alex Honnold, was he's talking about free soloing on the crucifix in Yosemite and just this idea of like rushing to try to get to the top almost, where suddenly you realize you could just walk around the backside to get to the top if that was your goal, and kind of this mentality of like, do look down, like remember that like this is the place that you wanted to be in, and take a moment to appreciate that. Which is kind of crazy when you're on this like vertical, it feels like you're hanging over the world, and you're going to stop and recognize, look down, realize that you're ropeless, realize that you don't have a harness on, and like see the ground below you. So it's two parts. One, right? Like there's that classic anxious human brain, which is constantly like, ooh, I've got one more like 5'11" pitch, and who knows how that's going to go. And it's really hard for me to enjoy this romper terrain when I'm thinking about how scary that 5'11" crack is going to be, 2,000 feet up the wall. And then you get past that crux and you're thinking like, okay, cool. Now I just have like a couple of 5'10" pitches to down climb on the Kearney Harrington. Hopefully those aren't too scary. So it's definitely like a bit of a battle to remain present and to enjoy the moment that you're in and not just think about what's next?
Mm-hmm.
And that, yeah, I think that goes in two ways. Like one, sometimes you're thinking about what comes next in terms of like technical climbing and how much more you have to do before you feel safe and you know that you're safe again and that you've survived this experience. And then because we're human again too, there's also this like part of your brain that starts thinking about like how people are going to think about the experience that you're having, you know? Mm-hmm. And same thing, that's one of those things that you just got to actively work to take out of, to not spend your time thinking about, you know, if you're thinking all about like, oh, when I get back to Fresco Bar, I'm going to tell people that I free soloed St. Exupery and down climbed it, and they're going to think, you know, and it's like, I think to have the awareness and recognize that because we are human, to have feelings like that are natural. And then to be like, cool, I had that feeling. I recognized it. I accepted that I had it. And then I'm like, going to put that behind me and I'm going to like continue moving forward and just like, yeah, once again, I'm going to actually take this moment to take a couple breaths and look down and appreciate where I am in this wild, wild world.
Well, I imagine in Patagonia, there's also the one, you know, there's got to be a few brain cells going like, okay, what's next with the weather? You know, like,
oh yeah,
what are those cirrus clouds? Oh, is there, you know, like, is there a breeze? Was that a breeze I just felt? You know, like,
yeah, it's funny
kind of a thing. I mean, I haven't climbed there, so I'm only, you know, there's conjecture from all the writing that I've read about it, but you know, it's not Yosemite. You know, it's not like, oh, it's perfectly nice at 7 a.m., so it's very likely to be perfectly nice at 9 p.m. tonight too. You know.
Well, and you start off, this trip into the Torrey Valley was 5 days for me. Mm-hmm. And you start off with the forecast for the day that you're hiking in. You take like the last forecast you can possibly get. You take all your screenshots or whatever, and then you take that out with you. But then all of a sudden you're 4 days in and you know that each one of those 4 days that weather forecast has changed.
Right. It blew up. So yeah.
So yeah, while you're like, well, the forecast I'm looking at says that Thursday is going to be sunny. Maybe it's not. Like maybe that whole storm that was supposed to come in on Friday just decided to move in a day early. And now as once again, as you're standing on top of St. Exupery without a rope, without any ways of surviving a storm or getting off this mountain except for just being able to free solo down climb. Yeah, it's definitely a pretty intimidating, looming threat. But once again,
you weren't done.
You try to leave a little bit of margin in there. You know, you're not trying to climb the thing right before the storm comes in. You're trying to get off of it well before the storm comes in. So even if the storm comes in a little early, hopefully you're out of there.
How long did that, like just guessing, maybe you don't have it, or maybe you did time it, how long did it just take from ground to ground? Or like down to down, wherever you felt like you were off?
I get the two, you know, the west ridge of Raphael and the Sierra de Luna confused as to exactly when I got down for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say like both of them I finished in the daylight and started a little bit before the sun came up. Yeah. Right. Actually on the west ridge, I was like fully down to base camp. Like maybe it was like 11 hours or something like that.
Okay.
And Sierra de Luna took me a little bit longer. And I think I was like coming back into camp like as it was getting dark. Lots of pitches, lots of terrain, you know. I mean, obviously, once again, I'm used to doing the Yosemite stuff where El Cap's like 5 minutes from the road, or, you know, it's maybe like a mile to get to things. But you feel to get into the Torrey Valley feels like whatever, 12 miles, 15 miles, depending on how far back in there you go. And then you're at the base of the death slabs, you know, you've got another 3,000 feet of crazy talus-y, loose rock to climb up. And then you get to the base. And you get to start doing your thing. I think that by doing those solos, it taught me like one kind of what my capabilities were in the range and how I could look at a guidebook and interpret what I could do with what I was looking at. You know, I'd taken these topos. I'd been like, okay, this is what I'm seeing on the topo. This is what I'm looking at on the rock. Like, this is what I think my abilities are. I'm going to go for it and see how that works out and have these potential ways to back out if it's too much. And once again, both of those were some of the most incredible soloing experiences I've had in my life, maybe even more so than Fitzroy in some ways. The climbing was actually probably better, you know, and harder in some places too. Like, you know, Fitzroy is kind of like 5'10", the way I did it, but the Sierra de Luna is 5'11" for sure, just a little shorter, you know. But yeah, so I got back when I finally got out of the Torrey Valley. That was one of those things. I topped out Tierra de Luna, and then I got down, and then I still just was like fired up and was like, I'm going to hike all the way out of the Torrey Valley right now, which was that, whatever, 15 miles from where I was at least, you know? And so I hiked like through the night. There were some friends who were supposed to be leaving the next day, and I really just like, you know, was like couldn't sleep with the like energy that was in me. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to just like hike out of here and go say goodbye to them before they take off in the morning back to their respective countries. And it's a wild navigational challenge to get out of the Torrey Valley in the darkness. It's just like, right, this dry glacier at points, it feels like it's got these like maelstroms in it, like these spots of the earth that are like sucking downwards. And if you're not careful, you're just going to get like swallowed by the earth, and you know, loose rocks are falling all over the place, but they're kind of on ice, so you also might slip, and it's just like total chaos and madness there. And I'm trying to get out, and at one point I remember getting to this place and being like, the ground's sparkling, like there's these little lights on the ground, these little like blue lights. it was tripping me out for sure, until suddenly I realized I was like, oh, those are stars, which means that I'm at the lake. And the problem with being at the lake is that you're supposed to go way high and around this lake. So I just dropped into like the worst possible spot. And it's like 2 a.m. in the darkness after I've been up for hours after soloing Exupery. And then just like having to like claw my way out from the lake bed back up into where hopefully there's a trail. And, you know, eventually you like stumble back into Shelter Cove, just like all beat up and destroyed, but immediately the hospitality of the locals there, your friends, you know, just like the even the landscape, you're back into like hospitable wilderness again, and to get back and to start to like talking to people, and you know, I didn't get back and be like, yo, everybody, guess what I did, you know. I'm always the type, I mean, honestly, I went through a part of my soloing career where my rule was you don't tell anybody about this stuff. Because as soon as you start telling people about it, then the next solo you're going to be on, you're going to be thinking about what it's like to tell people about it.
Sure.
So for a while, I had like a do not speak about your free solo experiences. And so that lingers. You know, I still have little bits of that. These days, my perspective has changed to just, you know, they're shared stories that should be shared. You know, not everyone's going to.
Right.
Not everyone's going to, and definitely not everyone should like try to go do these things. But hopefully they'll get to hear my stories, and that's fun too. And they get to like vicariously.
Yeah, no, it's good that you're talking about it. Had I been like, let's talk about your freestyling, you've been like, no.
You've been like, oh, okay, well, what do you want to talk about?
Great 10-minute podcast, thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
No, there's more to talk about than the free soloing. I'm actually joking.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, in a lot of ways, like this whole conversation we've been having for the last few minutes isn't exactly about the free soloing per se. I mean, it's like I said, it's such a complex thing, and it's such a complex motivation, and people go at it so differently in so many ways that it's, you know, we've gone way beyond that.
Yeah, that's why it's fun to talk about, because like you said, I think that when you see the news headlines or you see like a photo of someone free soloing, like you're getting a very external perspective, and it's fun to get to talk about, to just be like, no, there's like so much other things going on inside, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, like just to be grim for a little minute, like I've spent a lot of years on the search and rescue team, and I got to see like, you know, some of the gnarly stuff. And in some ways, I think that turns a lot of people off from climbing in general. And especially you can see how that might turn you away from free soloing or any sort of like dangerous style of climbing. For me, I always really appreciated getting kind of the firsthand experience of like what the consequences are. You know, it's like when I go up there in the mountains, like those thoughts are in my head, like that's with me, you know, and it's like kind of a burden that you have to carry, but also it's like, like I feel like I have to, you know, like I have to be thinking about those people that I've seen that were dead, you know, and realize that I'm putting myself in a place where like that could happen to me if I don't like do it right. Like, for example, I've had dreams to climb the free rider for a really long time, like most of us, or a lot of folks are trying to go for the free rider, I know. And I had just kind of like a really rigid style I wanted to do it in. I wanted to do it in a day, all free, and ideally with like both people freeing if not every pitch, like at least all the crux pitches. So kind of like free climbing, but mainly like free climbing while simul climbing. With these like high ideals, it basically made it so that the more times we tried it and realized, oh, it's so hard, and like trying to find the like corners that we can cut to make it possible. And not to say that I'm like trying to cut corners, but I'm, to climb quickly, I don't place a lot of gear on easy terrain. And just the year before, we had dealt with like the double fatality with Tim and Jason falling off the free blast, and suddenly we were on the free blast again. Myself and another friend who was also on that double recovery, and he's watching me run it out, and the whole time he's thinking like, do you not remember like what happened? Do you not remember like being here in this very place, like dealing with the consequences of this, And so we got to Heart Ledges and kind of had a pretty like emotional moment in which, once again, he was asking those things like, are you not thinking about those guys? And I was saying the opposite, like, no, I'm thinking about those guys every single moment of this. And like, yeah, maybe that like makes it feel like climbing is like, you could paint that as like, oh, climbing's tainted in a way. But in some ways, like I accept carrying that burden to go do these things. Like I have to be real about them if I want to keep doing them. And to that extent too, it's totally okay if I decide someday like I don't want to do it. Like, oh, maybe we should just wall out the free rider and not have to run out the pitches so much and actually bring in number 6 with us,
Right.
Yeah.
I would suggest that.
Yeah.
The number 6, I mean.
No, yeah, I sent without the 6.
Nice. Good for you, I guess.
That was good. It was solid. Honestly,
Nice.
This last time the monster, I was like, maybe it's because I did a bunch of like blue collar work this summer, like a bunch of like heavy manual labor. Sure. But I went back to the monster off with it this year, and for this ascent that I was trying to do, and so I'm not the biggest rope soloist, but I'm in that thing with the gree on my waist and just like no number 6, just being like, well, there are bolts a certain ways up. So if I get to the bolts and I'm not feeling it, like there is once again this out. And the nice thing about if you ever have to down climb off with cracks is it's mainly just like sliding, But I got in that thing.
Arresting your slide every few,
exactly.
inches.
I got in that thing and just like it felt so good. I was like, wow, it's never felt so good. This is gonna work for sure.
So you rope soloed the free rider free on a gree solo setup.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah. Maybe it would have been nice to like use a silent partner or whatever.
Well, I just talked to Pete like a month ago about that, and like, the idea of you doing it on a gree is tip of the hat to you, sir. Is that
what he used? Didn't he use a gree?
No, he used the silent partner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mistake. Right. So Peter's an incredibly strong climber, and so definitely like getting ready for this mission, knowing that he was the only person who had ever soloed the free rider.
Not helpful, probably.
Rope solo, free climb the free rider in a day.
Yeah.
I was like, like I definitely don't have what he's got in him. And in his experience, I think like what I've heard is the enduro corners were for sure like, he's like, I just had to like pay out a bunch of slack and punch it. And I haven't really worked the enduro corners out much, and not being that nearly that strong of a climber. It's basically like, I feel like that's where I'm going to fail. Like maybe I'll get to that point and fail. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I was kitted to do like the in a day. Like I thought I was going to try to free climb it, rope soloing. All the words are hard. Rope solo, free climb it in a day. But I thought the edge that maybe I had that would help me like, keep up with Pete or like, have a chance to do this thing that like only this other incredibly strong rock climber had done is like I'm a really good rigger and I know all these like crazy tactics, So I'm going to go up there and I'm going to do, certain pitches, maybe I'll fully free solo. Certain pitches, I'll do the classic, belay, roped solo belay. Other pitches, I'm going to do some upside down rappelling where you thread the anchors and then the two strands go up with you and you clip only fixed gear and lever beaners. And then when you get to the top point, you unclip one of those strands and then you can pull the whole rope up with you. Tactics, right? And so I had all these ideas for tactics. And I started off on the free blast at like 4 p.m. There was all these parties that had just bailed because it was really windy. And they're like, we can't hear each other. It's heinous up there. And I was like, oh, well, great thing about solo climbing is, and I just like put in the headphones, and all of a sudden it kind of seems like the wind stops. You don't have to worry about communication with your partner over that stuff, and I felt like I was climbing really well. But trying to use these tactics, I would just do these things that were like kind of scary, like more scary than it needed to be. Not like overtly dangerous, but more scary than it needed to be, only to not like have too much rope drag to pull my upside down rappel and have to like rappel down anyways. And I'm like, I could have just belayed myself like normal and it would have been fine, right? Like basically if I just had stuck to a tactic and done it, then I would have been all right. But I was going hard and got all the way the 10 or 12 pitches up to Heart Ledges pretty fast. I thought I was doing good, but totally exhausted. Like I had just been sprinting for like 3 hours and was totally bonking, and climbed one more pitch, this pitch off Heart Ledges. And this is kind of where my like shenanigans tactics, this is like my low moment on the route, because the pitch off Heart is like one little boulder problem, one sort of slabby boulder problem. And I remembered it as being this pitch that has 2 bolts on it. And so I was going to do this upside down rappelling thing where I was clipped into the first bolt to rappel off of, and then threaded the second bolt, and then just like from the second bolt do the crux move and keep going, and then be able to pull my rope and never have to rappel back down to get my stuff, or to undo the anchor. But when I got on this pitch, suddenly I realized as I'm soloing to get even to this quote unquote first bolt, and free soloing, like ropeless, just like with all my stuff. And then I get to this where I think this first bolt's going to be, and I'm like, oh, it's just a single bolt. And the only thing to thread through before it is this ancient ring piton that's probably from the first ascent of the Salafay. It's probably straight from that era. And so all of a sudden I'm threaded through just this single ring piton and then clipped into this bolt, but kind of feeling like if the ring piton blows, it's going to pull the loop through this bolt and I'm going to fall all the way to the ground. So instead I clip like one strand into it, and then I've got this weird death triangle going on, and that's weird too. And I'm like, oh no, I'm really screwing this up. So I end up taking my daisy chain, which, daisy chains have those sewn loops in them. So those loops blow at like 300 pounds or something like that. They're not full strength, whereas the whole sling is full strength. So I clipped directly into this bolt, having several of those sewn loops left, so that if I fell, it was basically going to act like a screamer, and I was going to fall directly onto that bolt. And so, yeah, I give it one go, and I do the beta totally wrong, and I fall, and just I fall on the heart move, and this one loop of my daisy chain just like poof, blasts out, and all of a sudden I've like only got like 3 more loops left. And there's this guy down on Heart that later recounts, he's like, yeah, I just heard you whining up there going, I just don't have that many loops left. And and luckily I was like able to do it on like the next go, but that was just that point. Like I get to the ledge that's after the pitch, and I'm just like, that was not pretty. Like, you got to get your shit together. And I was basically like, I'm going to bail. Like, I'm so tired. I was sitting on this ledge, and I just started like eating all my snacks like as fast as I could. Not on purpose, but I like couldn't control the ravenous post bonk sort of recovery attempt. And I did have this micro little haul bag with me, and in the bottom of it was a sleeping bag. And like the moment, you know how it is, I grabbed the sleeping bag and I pulled it out, and the moment the sleeping bag was in my hand, I was like, oh, it's over. So much for my one day ascent of the free rider. And then I'm in the sleeping bag knowing I'm not gonna get out, not gonna move till morning. And then when morning finally comes, I'm still planning on bailing, but I have some more food and some more water, and I'm at least gonna spend some of the day up on the mountain, like I'm alone up on the ledge. And I'm like, oh, this will be nice. So I decide, okay, I'm gonna go one more pitch, because the ledge I'm on, Lung Ledge, is pretty terrible, but Hollow Flake Ledge is awesome. So I get my stuff together and I climb to Hollow Flake Ledge, and I do the whole like down climb and do the whole pitch free and get my stuff up there. And then I just like tuck into this shadowy little corner on Hollow Flake Ledge and just like reclude into this, hide from the sun, because I don't have that much water or anything like that. And meanwhile, all the other parties that are down there start catching up to me and like passing me, and they're just like, what are you doing here? And I'm just hanging out. I'm taking the day. I'm like working on my cuticles, like got the salve out, and I'm like pushing my cuticles back and making them look all beautiful.
You're like a little troll.
Yeah,
like a little troll inside of this.
Yeah, the hollow flake troll, exactly. A couple of friends passed, some other parties, and one of Jordan Cannon and Emily Harrington were doing some of their like preparatory laps to get up for the Golden Gate, and so they passed by, and I remember same thing, like they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I don't know, I'm just hanging out." I was like, "But I'm kind of psyched. I might climb a couple more pitches." And Emily gives me one of those Vogue tabs. She's like, "Here, take this Vogue tab." I'm like, "What is this?" She's like, "Oh, natural energy supplement enhancement or whatever." And she's like, "I swear by them. They're amazing." And so she hands me the one, and I was like, "Okay, whatever." Like I'll keep this, But it sort of felt like one of those things that's like someone gives you that thing that you're like, well, I'm not gonna like take this so that I can rappel. I'm gonna like take this little like caffeine pill, and like if I'm gonna keep going up. And like that first party that had passed me were some friends, and they're like, "Yeah, come up to the alcove this evening. Like bivvy with us up there. We'll hang out. We'll tell stories. It'll be great." So after literally like 7 hours of sitting on Hollow Flake Ledge, like being the little ledge troll in the corner and having all these other parties pass by me, the sun starts to go down, and I'm not the kind of climber who likes to climb in the heat. So as soon as it starts to get cool again, I start getting psyched again, and I start climbing after these parties that are, now they're in the monster off with, and I'm on Hollow Flake Ledge, so that's probably, 6 or 7 pitches away. And most times when you encounter soloists on El Cap, they're really slow. You just expect them to be a total junk show, but I have some different tactics, so I like start gaining on these parties. Like I start like catching up to them, and I catch them. Like the one party, they're basically like, "We're not going to do the monster. We're just going to jug these other lines and get out of here." And I was like, "Great," because I'm doing I want to do the monster right now. And like, there's like this hour, as the sun is setting, it's kind of like the breeze picks up for a bit, and so the conditions are really good. But then as soon as the sun fully goes down, it gets kind of muggy again. So at the time I get to the monster off with, it's like this kind of golden hour of not in the sun. The wind is blowing, but it's not that like still air yet. And as I was describing the monster a little bit before, there's this like down climb to get into it. And I start doing the down climb, and in my head I'm like, "Oh, I'm doing this so wrong. Oh, like this is not the beta. Every move that you're doing is so wrong." And then I looked left, and I was like, "Oh, there's the monster off with right there." And you can just like reach across and grab it and pull over, and then in the monster off with. And as I was saying before, it felt, I don't want to say it's easy because I know the monster isn't easy, but it was like felt easy for me that time, And then I get up to the alcove with my friends who are up there, and it's probably 8 p.m. They're packing up for the night, and they're like in their sleeping bags already. And so we hang out and chat for a bit, and I take this little Vogue tab that Emily gave me. I'm like, "Guys," I say, "What?" "I'm going to go do the Teflon corner right now." Which is like one of the crux pitches of the route, whether you do the Teflon or the boulder problem. And it's still like several pitches above where we were at the alcoves, and it's dark now. But I just started, going for it. I just was psyched and start lay back in this endless, like 200-foot long, awkward, wide pitch, and do another pitch. And then before I know it, I'm at the base of the Teflon corner, and it's like almost midnight, and the near full moon is rising, and I'm just like up there alone on the head wall, just amped and just like in the full palm stem. And then all this, like I managed to do the Teflon, on lead. And that was kind of that moment where this switch flipped in my head from, right, I thought I was bailing for the longest time. I was like, "I'm going down, I'm bailing. Well, I'll just do one more pitch. And then getting the alcove and being like, "I'm going to go do the Teflon." And it's obviously, I was getting pretty psyched again there. It's obviously not just bailing at that point. But then I set the Teflon and was like, "Oh my goodness, like this could actually go. Like I could do this whole thing." But it's midnight, and I know that I'm going to have to get to the corners before they go into the sun the next day, because if it's hot, there's no way I can climb them. So I sleep for like 2 hours on some little tiny nondescript ledge, wake up, and probably take like a couple ibuprofen, because at this point my body's like in some pain, and race up to the enduro corners. And I ended up doing those pitches on top rope because, as I had said earlier, there's just no way, knowing like who Pete is, I was like, there's no way I'm going to just more or less on site lead free climb the enduro corners because of how little I know about the beta for them. Mm-hmm. So I ate up them as fast as I can. I link them both in one pitch. I fix the rope at the top. I wrap back down and I put just like a micro tracking setup on, like a little top rope solo. And then I'm racing the sunlight. It's like on the wall beside me, but because it's a corner and there's a little overlap, like my hands and feet are still in the shade. And I just barely like screaming and all like by the skin of my teeth get to the top of the enduro. And then the traverse, the round table traverse out to the left is in full sun now. And I fall like a bunch of times. And because it's a traverse, I have to like come all the way back. But on the time I finally am going for it, I end up, there's these like Wacos, and I end up shoving one of my legs in the Wacos that my hands are also on. So I've got, right, and I'm rope soloing, and I somehow did it wrong. So I've got the rope running like behind my leg out to the right, and my leg shoved in this crack that's like not very secure. And I'm like flexing every part of my body just to try to stay in it. Meanwhile, I'm more or less bat hanging off the top of El Cap just by this, shaking out every little ounce of chalk I have left in my chalk bag to just barely by the skin of my teeth get around the corner to Round Table Ledge, where I find a gallon of water, like a really old, nasty looking gallon of water. But, keep in mind, like I tried to go up there for like an in a day ascent. And now this is like day 2.5. I don't know. It's hard to keep the time straight when you're like climbing it during midnight and you're starting at 4 p.m. or whatever. But I find this gallon of water, and knowing that the pitches are like, I've sent all the hardest pitches up to there, I kind of like got a little emotional, like, oh my gosh, like I'm actually gonna do it. But every pitch from there to the top was like a fight tooth and nail for sure. Just like I remember on like one of the last 5-10 pitches, the rope was pigtailing. Of the twists were jamming in my gree, and so I'm climbing this like ring locks crack 0.75s, and I'm like meanwhile trying to rip slack out of my gree with my teeth while I'm holding onto these like not very secure jams. And some guys that I passed on the route at some point before the enduro corners, so my other friends ran into them and were like, yeah, we met your friend Jim. He was cool. He was really psyched. Maybe somewhat insane or psychotic, I think was their exact words. Psychotic. Somewhat psychotic. I thought that was fair because I think they like met me in a very particular mode.
Right.
Like maybe you wouldn't think I was that psychotic if you met me on the ground, but it's like you guys saw me like in the middle of like one of those really, really extreme moments in life,
So this is actually good. This is a good, I think, rope soloing deterrent. 'Cause I get a lot of folks asking me about it. I also rope soloed El Cap as an 8 climber a fair few times, and and cool. And I usually kind of like, well, look, it's not something you do because it's awesome. You sort of do it because it's gonna achieve the goals you have. Yeah. And the fact that, because I'm thinking of that 0.75 crack at the end of the Salte, it's like it should be truly one of like your glorious climbing career moments where you're just like, you're on the very tippy top of the head wall and you're like putting in these good jams and crushing the rock is perfect. 10. And you're crushing after all the things you've done. It's just like this, it's really like a crowning pitch, just for pure pleasure. And there you are just like absolutely fucking it up and like
just like, oh no.
This should be amazing, but this goddamn rope won't go through my gree, and I'm like getting pumped, and I'm gonna fall off, and So anyway, so
that's the reality of it, though, right? Like, it's just the same thing. People get all the summit photos of Fitzroy or whatever, and then all of a sudden you summit Fitzroy, and it's like totally overcast, and you can't see anything, or whatever. Those last couple of pitches were just, literally, I would find these little micro ledges and try to fall asleep for like as long as I could, and then wake up at some point and like take some ibuprofen and like wait another half hour and then try to do another pitch. And when I finally did the last 5-10 pitch, which was once again like tooth and nail, then the last pitch I was able to just like put the rope away and solo to the top in kind of once again the full moonlight, and found a nice little bivvy, and then hiked down the next day and went back to the SAR site and kind of returned all the gear I had borrowed for the mission. And it was cool because it was actually the only time I climbed El Cap last year, which normally it's like something I do. I try to climb El Cap a bunch because I love climbing El Cap, but I hadn't even laid a hand on El Cap for the whole season until this ascent. And, I mean, the free ride is something I've been working on for lots and lots of years. I think that I'm much more naturally like a good speed climber, or like I'm really good at climbing 510, right. But as soon as we start getting into 512, it's or anything harder, it's a different story, I think one other thing that maybe I kind of got lost on was, I think you were asking me about the Fitzroy and the on-sighting of the Fitzroy, and like how that came to be. And I told you this stories, right, of doing Raphael and Exupery, and then finally coming back out of the mountains. And one thing I just wanted to touch on there that I think is kind of funny about the story of Fitzroy is, like, really I just wanted to climb Fitzroy like anybody else. I wanted some way of getting up Fitzroy, and there was a couple things against me, and one was that I couldn't find a good partner. Like, I had good partners, but they had all climbed Fitzroy before, so none of them wanted to put in all their eggs in that basket. And then the other thing was that there were these weather windows coming up, but they were all really short. So if I were to do it in the normal style of going out there for, the normal style, it would take a lot longer. But after having just had these successes on the Torrey Valley side, it's like, maybe I could go in, like, Fitzroy's technically easier than these other pitches. And I just proved to myself that I can down climb. And I've also got this little kit dialed in for if I do need to bail. So I went out to Fitzroy. And I actually tried it twice. The first time I got, like, hard to even know how many pitches, probably like 10 pitches up into this place called Las Placas, the slabs, the Great Slabs. And I had forgotten my vest, which seems like a kind of unimportant thing to forget. But because the layering systems can be so important out there, it's like I could either try to climb in my long sleeve and be too cold, or climb in my puffy and totally destroy it. And I really just needed the vest. I don't know. It was like this weird. I probably bailed for a lot of other reasons, partially because I had just gotten out of the Torrey Valley and you need a lot of rest from that stuff. But I turned around and bailed and like down climbed most of the way, and then did actually rappel one like 510 pitch there. Went back to town, saw my roommate, my mentor, Tad, and started just shaking my head. I was like, you'd be proud of me. I bailed because it wasn't right. And I bailed knowing in my heart that maybe I'd never get a chance to do this again. And that's okay with me. I accept that. And he laughed and goes, well, you should check the weather. And there's this another perfect epic window, like just as long as I need it to try again. And so I went out the second time. And luckily this time I remembered my vest, all the things I needed, and got out there and got on Fitzroy. And it was maybe even in better condition than it had been before. And I started moving, and the topo for that thing is hilarious. Like, if you look at the topo for the nose, it takes up 2 pages of a guidebook. If you look at the topo for the Afonasieff on Fitzroy, it's like in the margins. Mainly it's like these squiggly lines that say like 300 meters, 510, Right. Like it comes in like 3 chunks or 4 chunks. And so you get out there and like you really have no idea where you're going. And so, that mountain terrain is just so much on-sighting in general. I think like it makes the way that I solo, if I were to contrast it to like the solo of the free rider, that's all about attaining perfection and having something so dialed that you can do it perfectly. And for something like Fitzroy, I knew I didn't have to do it perfectly. Like there were mistakes that I could make, but obviously there were certain mistakes that I for sure couldn't make. So it was more about just doing it excellently, like this pursuit of excellence, right. I remember at some point kind of nearing the top of Fitzroy, I had seen these old, like, I think it's Alex Huber, who's soloing somewhere in the Alps, and he's like free soloing wearing a helmet. And I always thought that video clip was so strange. I was like, why would you free solo with a helmet? And then there I am on the last couple hundred meters of Fitzroy, and it's just like raining ice chunks down at me because the sun's out more than I'd maybe expected it to be. And it's just raining ice down. I'm like, oh, I wish I'd brought my helmet. Like, it seems so weird to not bring a harness and to bring a helmet, but suddenly I was just like, oh no, this was like my great mistake. And then that leather pants and a helmet. Leather pants and a helmet.
I think that's standard equipment for the Hubers.
Yeah. And if you're doing stuff like that, maybe brown leather pants. Yeah. Yeah, that was a cool one to like get to the top of, and same thing, like, okay, it's 3:13 in the afternoon and we're halfway there. And that one, right. The storm was like, I was kind of pretty close up against the storm. It's supposed to be the next day. So That's still plenty of time, but that's no time to stop and bivvy. And so down climbing, I went off route a couple times. It took quite a bit longer to down climb than to up climb. I think it took me 6 hours to climb up and 9 hours to climb down, something like that, roughly. And so it got kind of real towards the end when I got back to the slabs. And originally, right, the slabs, they have these cracks that go up them that you don't really use. And those cracks were full of ice. Not a big deal because you're climbing on the slabs around the ice. But while I had been on the upper part of the head wall, that hot midday sun had been melting the ice out of the cracks. And so they'd been seeping down over the slab. So now the slab, as I returned to it, this is probably like 9 p.m., in the dark, I returned to this slab and now it's soaking wet, which is manageable. But the longer it takes me, the more that water is going to turn back into ice. And there's no way I'm like going to down climb these like frozen slabs. So that was definitely like one of the parts that got most exciting, because you're just looking down below you and you see like 1 or 2 holds, down there below your feet somewhere, and you step down and you step down, and then you look around and you see like 2 more holds and you step down that way. And then there's a couple more holds, but like the whole time you're going down, you just feel like you're dropping further into the abyss. Like there is no clear path back to the ground. You're just like climbing into endless darkness, sort of a thing. But then there's like this one last boulder problem that sets you up in this position where you can sort of jump. And I like jumped and like stuck this little ledge, and then like it's like, yeah, we're like to the bottom of the slabs, and kept kind of racing through these dark corridors to get back to the base at midnight. Full moon this night. It was the solstice, no, the equinox, the fall equinox, and the full moon. And I just like finished soloing Fitzroy, and this storm is coming in. And so it's coming across the mountains, and these dark storm clouds are blasting into Fitzroy, hitting the Afonasieff, which is the knife-like ridge that I had just climbed up. And these clouds are hitting this knife ridge and splitting in two and arcing around Fitzroy and curling on the backside, and kind of increasing in their ferocity as that storm is approaching more and more. And I'm like, okay, it'd be nice to sleep at the base of the route, but I got to get out of here. So starting at midnight, I'm like heading back across this glacier, which is like a real glacier and has real crevasses, but all the crevasses were exposed. It was strange. Like in the time that I'd climbed the route, the glacier changed conditions a lot, to the point where I felt like every single crevasse that there was. And originally, being someone who didn't understand much about glaciers and crevasses and the alpine terrain, it was amazing to feel like I had the blueprint, like the schematic to what is a glacier. I was like, oh, this is how they form. They're like rivers, and they flow and they crack, but yeah, just like dancing in the full moonlight across this open glacier field, trying to like slowly get out of there back to civilization, and got up and over the last pass into this cool little cave, and disappeared into the cave just as the storm was coming in, and let some of it pass before I like hiked the rest of the way out. And it's really cool. Sean Villanueva just did that, the Moonwalk Traverse, his solo ascent of it. And that was so amazing for me to hear about, because I've been on that side where when I feel like I'm soloing, it's not just me. It's like I'm the result of all the people who have, supported me throughout my life, And it was cool, Sean doing his traverse, because I felt like I was suddenly on the other side, whereas like I felt like I got to do it with him a little bit, like I feel like I get to share that experience. And I'm like, cool, I didn't have to like put myself out there in the mountains. But the thing he talks about, he like brought his little tin flute with him and played it on every summit. And same thing, he talks about how he came out the far side and spent like an extra day sitting in a cave. And it's kind of cool to just think like, oh, I wonder if that was the same cave.
Right.
I wrote an article for The Alpinist about Fitzroy that I called The Rhythm of the Mountains. And that title is because I think especially in a place like that, but maybe just in general, it's really important to tap into the rhythm, to like not be on your schedule or what you want to do, but to be able to like listen to the natural world around you, and to be like, what can I do? What will you let me do? Yeah. And just, I don't know, huge respect for Sean, because I feel like not only did he find the rhythm of the mountains, but he also maybe found what key they're in.
So I wanted to ask you about your partnership with Brad Gobright, someone I knew fairly well, at least in his beginning years. He was on the show, and you're sort of partnered with him in our psyche because of the Real Rock and doing the speed ascent on the nose together. So, let me ask you, like, what worked in terms of your partnership with him. Some ways I see you guys as similar climbers. Some ways, I see you as very different. You've got the Orange County suburban kid and versus like the guy who wants to go disappear into the woods. I mean, those are some differences I see. But you definitely have a kind of a go forward attitude that seem to complement one another, obviously. But yeah, what do you think like worked with the two of you guys to get that nose thing done and any of the other climbing that you did together?
Yeah, I think you pointed out well that Brad and I shared some things, but we're also very different people in a way. I think some of the things that we shared was our background in the free solo climbing. And I think one of the things that helped us is we both really trusted each other, knowing that as individuals, we had curated that space of the do not fall zone and how to keep it together. Yeah, we had originally met in Squamish, but then our time together, like we weren't super close friends, I'd say, before we started climbing on El Cap and the nose and that sort of thing, just really close in the community. Like I had been climbing with like different partners and had never climbed the nose in under 10 hours and had been asked by like a friend, like, well, what do you think you could climb it in if you had the perfect partner or whatever? And kind of timidly, I was like, I don't know, like maybe like 7 hours or something. And so I was sort of looking for that person that I felt like could enable me to do that quicker ascent of the mountain. And eventually someone recommended, like, well, what about Brad? And I knew Brad is a climber with a lot more experience than me, someone who climbed a lot harder. And sometimes I get a little intimidated with climbing with better climbers than me. But Brad was just such an approachable character. He was such like a disarming, like no matter how much fame he would ever have, like he never felt like a famous person, or you felt like you could just talk to him or even be weird in front of him, and that would be okay too. So as soon as I met Brad and started talking to him, he just seemed like someone I could get along with. And we went up to climb the nose, and I think our first time up there, we climbed it in 6.5 hours, which he also hadn't climbed it in under 10 hours. So I think both of us were like, wow, that's wildly different experience than what we've had before. And we just kind of agreed, like, let's see what we can do if we just put a couple more laps in. Obviously the idea of a speed record is so far away at that point, but it's just fun to, right. For me, for a long time on the nose, I was just chasing a feeling more than like a record. Like I just wanted that feeling of being in those upper 5-10 laybacks, being like, why am I so pumped? Oh, it's because of the stove legs 2,000 feet below us. We haven't stopped climbing since then. But yeah, as Brad and I kept climbing together, we just were, I guess, in such a similar place. And for me personally, I can't really speak too much about why he trusted me so much, but for him, right, I always felt like anything that I climbed, like if I struggled on it a little bit, like Brad would be able to free climb it not struggling. So like if I could do it, Brad could do it casually. So that helped a lot, because I mean, a lot of the stuff we did, I led. And when you're leading simulclimbing, you just have to trust that your follower isn't going to fall. So I could lead, and being like a very analytical climber, things like conserving the gear and like where exactly to place stuff and like how to set your follower up for success as they're going to do their lower outs or pendulum swings or whatever, like that kind of stuff, my mind could work out really well. Meanwhile, Brad in the back, I could just know that if I decide to run it out for 100 feet, even if Brad's on like 5'10 or 5'11 terrain below me, I'm actually not that worried about him falling, because Brad just didn't let go. He was really, really good at not letting go. And since I've like looked at some, I have other partners that I climb with, and it's hard to find someone that I have that same trust of. Like I've got another friend who I just climbed Fitzroy with this year, which was also an amazing experience. But like sometimes he just comes off the rock, like randomly. And it's like, as much as we're like best friends and maybe even like a stronger team than Brad and I were in terms of like our actual teamwork capability, like, because I can't necessarily like trust him to always hold on. Like, you know, maybe we'll climb the nose in 4 hours or something like that, you know? And then, you know, you just spend so much time with a person, like topping out the mountain, and then we'd hike down and we'd always talk about like what we could have done better. And you're like, what would another lap be like? But then also those conversations just devolve or evolve into just talking about life. And yeah, I remember some pretty funny mornings, just like getting in the car with Brad, and we're getting into his car, and I've got like a little speaker playing music, and I get into the car and he's like listening to the same music. He's like, oh, like this song? Yeah. And, yeah. And then I think too, the other thing that really worked for our partnership is that like, we're both just like monkeys, you know, like valley monkeys. Like we're just, both of us have spent a lot of years just like not spending a lot of money and just traveling to the places that we want to be. And like at some point, because I wasn't working for the search and rescue team, like he and I were both in the same talus field in different little rock caves. And we had never really knew where each other's spots were, minus that in the morning at 4 a.m. when we'd wake up to go to the nose, I'd see kind of in the distance somewhere else in the talus field, like another headlamp heading down towards the parking lot. And I felt like it was part of that spirit that also helped us climb together, that same love and passion for, I think we just shared a lot of like the reasons we climbed were similar. The one thing I think that makes us really different that I think back about Brad, and I always kind of wonder like, how did you do this? Is that I don't think Brad had much fear in his life. Like, I don't think he was really afraid of anything. It seemed like his biggest negative emotion was annoyance. Like, he never got angry. If he ever got sad, he didn't really like show it that much. Like, it all just came across as like being annoyed, you know, at stuff. Like if he was upset, he'd be like, oh, the tourists, and you know, or like, oh, I couldn't find a parking spot, you know. But you never hear him like truly upset, and you never hear him like truly scared. Which I think it's just like amazing to have been able to live your whole life without fear. Because I feel like I am very different in that way, where I choose not to live my life by fear. But I feel like I have a lot of fear in life, and it's almost because of that fear that I have to like aggressively choose to pursue the things that I love in life. Otherwise, that fear would take over. And yeah, I always kind of like look back to his example, and sometimes when I'm like in those deeper pits of like despair and just like fearing life and the world and like my choices, I just like think back about Brad, and I'm like, how are you so unconcerned, like nonplussed with all this stuff? Yeah.
So I talked to your current roommate, I don't think much longer, but Lauren not too long ago. And, you know, one thing I observed with her was how, you know, quickly she sort of got this lifetime of true climbing community experience, including, you know, the dark sides of it, including we had talked about Quinn's accident and her time on SAR and other people that were, you know, lost in the community in that time. And you know, you worked on SAR, and I've already brought up, you know, dealing with death in a lot of ways. And I don't know who else, you know, close to you or associated with you that you've lost in terms of climbing partners. But, you know, was it a shock, or was it difficult to deal with, Brad, or did you have, I don't know, coping mechanisms already in your life as a climber when people we know pass in the sport? I mean, definitely difficult to deal with. Like, Brad is for sure the person that I've been closest to who's passed. And, you know, I've been involved in some of the other people who I was close to, and then also was like involved in their recoveries. Like, those also were a little harder to deal with. But, yeah, I went through the classic, like when someone called me up and told me that they were pretty sure that Brad had passed away in like an accident in Mexico, you know, my first instinct was like, you must be wrong. Like, this can't be true, you know? Sure.
And also I first heard that it was a simul climbing accident as opposed to a simul rappelling accident, just to go into like some of the weirdness of what your own mind does. Like, I felt like if he had died simul climbing, then it would sort of like repudiate everything that we had done together. Like, to say that our experience together was like wrong and a mistake. So there was like strangely some solace in it being more attributed to like a fuck up of like not paying attention to, you know, like something preventable, rather than being like, oh, Brad was doing what he loved and following his dreams, and like that's how he died. I feel like it was just more like we all kind of knew that Brad didn't always keep it tight, you know? He was like the type to tie in on a single bowline sort of a thing, you know? Or like if there's one piece between him and the ground and that one piece was like kind of questionable, he would still like climb on, like focused on doing the thing, like on sending, you know? So him being in the high risk category, I think it's like, you know, I'd thought about it before and that helped a little bit. And then, yeah, I just think that in some ways, like throughout my life, like my relationship with death has just been different. Like I both like am very aware of like my own mortality and maybe like the mortality of our world as a whole. Yeah, which I think puts things in different perspective than when you're just thinking about like your own life and death, but you're thinking about like, well, potentially the death of the whole world if we don't like take this moment, this chance that we have to do what we can with it. You know, I think maybe that's like a little bit the part of like being born in this age with like the climate crisis and stuff like that is you have some awareness that like, even if you make all the right decisions, like who knows if like the planet will be around in the same way, like we'll have the same opportunities. And so, yeah, I guess being on SAR and dealing with death and seeing how it's affected other people and other people going through the grieving process. I also just like had and have a great community of people that I could rely on. You know, Brad was a huge part of the Yosemite community. And because that was where I lived and worked on the search and rescue team, like the rest of the SAR team knew Brad. And so to get to come together with those people throughout our grieving process was really powerful. We all went down to like one of his little memorials down in LA. And I think still there's our community is waiting for like the life celebration party that we're supposed to do on the top of El Cap for Brad, because to us, it didn't feel right to be celebrating his life in a climbing gym, even though that's where a lot of people do know him from. They're like, no, we have to go celebrate on top of El Cap. But because, you know, the pandemic and all that stuff, we haven't been able to like find that time to all come together. And then, yeah, like, I don't know, I get sad sometimes. Definitely there was like a point in time where I was with one of my best friends in the world, Mike Bryan's, climbing. And I just got sad just being like, I always wondered what it would be like if Brad came to Patagonia, because, you know, he had the potential to accomplish such incredible things down there. You also knew that because he didn't keep things very tight, he would be like one of the most reckless, like danger cases that ever entered the Torrey Valley. But like the things, you know, I think one of the things that helps me put it in really good perspective is that after Brad passed and seeing the response from the community made me realize that Brad impacted this world in his short time in like a more substantial way than I feel like a lot of people get the chance to in their whole life. You know, I meet people who knew Brad or just met Brad or was inspired by him that just talk so highly of what his example taught them. And I feel like that continues on. And in some ways that like helps me have like a little bit less like fear of, you know, like what my own passing would be like, because I know that up to this point, like I've lived in a way where I've been able to give back and put a lot of positive energy into people's lives and, you know, even save other people's lives, you know, who might keep going on for a while and do other great things. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there for sure about Brad's passing, but I think he lived a beautiful life. And I think that like his spirit continues on, and that's all we can kind of do with people that pass is like continue to carry their spirit, take what we remember as the best parts of them and most like powerful parts of their energy and like try to live in a way that does that respect, you know, in silly ways. Like literally when I hangboard, I think about like, well, Brad wouldn't let go yet, you know, but in other more meaningful ways. Like one of the things that was really great about Brad is Brad was never the definition of cool, but because of his self-assuredness and the way that he lived and interacted and treated other people, he was the coolest. For as goofy as he was cool in that way that let us all be a little bit more ourselves and our own goofy selves, and to realize that like that's like the coolest person we can be is ourselves, you know. Yeah, that was like a huge thing I learned from Brad that I don't know, I want to like keep taking forward, you know. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a life lesson that'll last till you also pass from the planet. So yeah, hats off to Brad. That's a really nice tribute, actually. Yeah, so 2020, you know, you just talked about how it messed up a lot of things, you know, the sort of celebration of life service or party for Brad. I mean, so many different things. Although climbing, for a lot of people after the initial shutdown, other than the international travel kind of, for a lot of folks, it went on. But we're getting out of the tunnel, I think.
Yeah.
I feel like there's definitely light at the end of the tunnel in a few months if things keep going the way they're going. So how do you feel about this year? What? Keep
it together a little while longer.
Actively, yeah, I know. There's people actively trying not to keep it together, but we won't get into that. But I mean, what do you feel about the new year? How you sort of psych wise and spirit wise rolling into 2021 right now?
Yeah, I'm definitely, as everybody is, I think, really looking forward to the end of the pandemic. I like to spend a lot of time alone, so some of that introversion and like social distancing stuff is good and has worked out for me. But I'm the kind of person that when I do come out of the woods, I really do want to spend time with people, and I want to be able to meet strangers in the boulder fields and get excited and like help like spot them when they're they're about to take a fall or whatever. And yeah, it's like a kind of meeting new people and being able to engage and share things. I think sharing is really nice and important and something that we don't get to do. Like you can't just like share a drink. Or I know that like a lot of live events have been canceled. It was sort of like I was looking forward to giving some more talks on stages and stuff and try to like get out and interact with the world a little bit more, try to participate some. And then I feel like the pandemic gave me this easy out to like reclude again. And yeah, looking forward to getting back out with the people. I'll be working a lot this summer, and so in a pretty remote place for that. And then I'm trying to go back to the valley and spend some time. And yeah, hopefully with the pandemic easing down, like everybody else will get to come out. And for a lot of the pandemic, honestly, I was like still in Argentina at like the southern tip of the world. Mm-hmm. So I felt pretty removed from it all. I think I've been really fortunate throughout the pandemic to be in rural places and to still have work. And so I think like in some ways I'm just like, my life's been pretty okay. So I'm looking forward to like how it improves for other people, like those who have really had to socially isolate. Like I imagine that there'll be like a lot of healing that'll have to occur after this. And, in some ways, maybe that role of like being privileged to like not have to be in the mix of it so much, like means that when we all come out of it, like I'll just help support other people and getting back out and learning to love the outdoors and interact once again. I think the one other thing maybe I guess I wanted to say is I'm in this point where I'm like sort of like at a career shift, moving on from search and rescue. So I'm just trying to dream big and keep imagining. And sometimes I have these like little ideas that don't really seem that well fleshed out, but the more you start to take steps towards them, the clearer they become. And so there's just lots of little things that I'm exploring in life that I'm really excited to keep exploring. And one of those things is jamming, playing music. I've got like two other guys that I've been playing music with that are in the pod. And at some point, and who knows, maybe we'll try to get up on like a little stage, play some gigs, do that sort of thing. Once again, just like it'll be fun to participate and interact and get to share with our fellow humans again.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot. This has been epic. Thanks a lot for the time. I'm glad that your agent / roommate helped me get this going. You're actually in the same quote unquote studio as she was. So,
she had the same wall color.
I really, same. No, she was like in a bedroom. Oh, okay. But anyway, same house. Yeah. But yeah, I totally appreciate it. I've been curious about you, what your story was. Those little kind of sort of like dispatches from Patagonia, and obviously that film. Although, I'll just say, in terms of the film, there just wasn't a lot there to sort of. It wasn't about you guys, and I felt like, you guys, they sort of put you in as this role, and I wasn't. I'll just say I wasn't that happy with that role. I don't know if you were, but just knowing Brad and stuff, but that it just piqued my interest about like, who is this guy really, like that's sitting there and kind of doing some laugh lines in this film, and knowing what you had done in Patagonia. I'm like, yeah, this is not like this is not the sum of who this gentleman is.
What happened?
So I'm so glad we got What's that?
What happened in between here? Or like, what happened before all
Yeah,
this?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I appreciate it. And I know the listeners have been curious as well to find out who Jim Reynolds is. And you've given us a lot here, a lot to think about. And I think we're going to look forward to checking you out. You don't have a ton of media out there. Is there any way for anybody to keep up with what you're doing?
Infrequent posts on Instagram is about it. Yeah. But if I do have anything coming up, like I probably will put it out there through Instagram or the social media. Yeah, I'm ramping up a little bit. I'm still looking forward to sharing more stories, and
cool.
And maybe there'll be some more ascents going on out there. But in some ways, I'm like, I've got so many little stories in the backpack that are worth like writing about or trying to get to share on a stage or at events and stuff like that. That I don't know. I think I'll be around and I'll be appearing more and trying to, I'll still be disappearing into the woods for months on end. But then
cool.
I'll be around.
That's all right. No, when you just pay it out little by little, that's what keeps everybody stoked.
Yeah,
so
you don't want to give too much of yourself
overdo
all at
it
once, and then have people expecting that you're always going to be getting on stage and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, it's been really nice talking to you. Yeah, we'll maybe chat down the line again sometime. Yeah,
I'd be awesome, and hopefully we'll run into each other in person. Speaking of not having a pandemic, maybe I'll be back to doing these face-to-face, but I probably wouldn't have had this opportunity without it, so it's worked out well for me. So thanks again, Jim.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right, thanks for listening, and thanks to Jim for sitting down and connecting. So many great stories, so much detail. Man, like what he was up to out there in Patagonia, and then that solo of El Cap. Like, did you get it when the whole daisy chain started snapping? I didn't really understand what was going on there, other than it sounded terrifying. And I've thought about that move a lot, actually. That's one of the moves that I think about when I think about Alex Honnold free soloing up there. It's not the hardest thing on the route, but it's a hard move right off the ledge there. Also, I mean, can you imagine like even just going on a hike where you thought you were going to be gone for the day, but hell, you're out there. Why not? Just stay out there for like 2.5, 3 days. Who cares? Oh, fun stuff. All right, folks, be careful out there yourselves. Set up those margins for error that Jim talked about everywhere you go climbing. And even if you're free soloing, which the Enormocast officially does not recommend, but if you happen to be, don't forget to check your knot anyway, if you know what I'm saying. And I think you do at this point, 216 episodes in. It's more than just the knot, bro.
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.